Okay. Welcome to our final literature discussion. And I want to start off with a quote or something that I just took from a website earlier this week to open up with us talking about storytelling workshop. History has shown that stories are linked to what it's meant to be human. Before there was formal communication, there were stories. So it should come to no surprise then that social movements and organizations like nonprofits, foundations, and social responsible businesses are now working to leverage stories as a strategic tool to advance important missions. Effective stories are powerful because they drive action, spurring donations, mobilizing supporters, and so many other things. So by building an emotional connection, stories bring to life the work of the issues we care so much about in ways that other forms of communication cannot. How has this class assisted you with becoming better storytellers? And we can open up to whoever wants to go.
I'll start if that's okay. I feel like this class has made me a lot more aware of myself, and thusly aware of others. And I feel more empowered to bear myself, and understand like my limits of bearing myself. So understanding my limits of bearing myself, I feel like I've been able to begin to be vulnerable with y'all in ways that I haven't been vulnerable with other people before. And also seeing, I don't know, feeling empowered and seeing the power that I hold when telling stories, or my own privilege and power in uplifting other people's stories. And I am really grateful for that. I'm not saying this well, but in my heart, I feel it. It's like I feel very strongly about what this class has done for I don't know, me sharing myself and communicating with other people and with the world, my experiences and my desire to hear the experiences of other people and see the humanity in all of us.
No, I felt that. Thank you for sharing.
I would echo all of that. And I think I would just tack on to that what Tessie's mentioned about sort of becoming more attuned to like dynamics of power and all that also play into how we honor other people's stories and tell our own. I think one of the things that I'm leaving this course with is I think being a better listener in some ways too. So being more aware of how I receive the stories of others, and hold that space and hold those stories as well that have been entrusted to me at various times. And so I'm really grateful for that as well.
Love the question. I think that this course has just been really empowering, really uplifting. It's really given me ownership over my own story. I thought I owned my story before, and I thought I was comfortable with it, and I thought I articulated it well, and I thought I carried it well. But then I recognized ways that I shirked the responsibilities of my story because I was vulnerable when sharing it. And then there was that power dynamic where you don't know how emotional you should be to try to create, motivation and connection to other values and other people. And so I think it's just helped me re-solidify my story and given me, clear directions on, articulating when and how and all of that. And And then again, just recognizing the power of storytelling and how that storytelling, I thought it was like, had to be this big thing. It was always this like big event to tell a story or to hear someone's story. But then I realized that like even when I teach technology, especially with older people, just to get someone to learn about technology, it's important to have them share their story. And so that they and their other students in the classroom can see that they're not alone or that they have similar experiences. And then they're more willing to learn how to use a computer. So it doesn't actually, sometimes stories don't actually lead to learning. You know what I mean? I don't know, it's so intersectional. It just collides with so many different things. And it's really been wonderful. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. You're absolutely right. One of the things that I learned is that we tell stories to connect with people on a daily basis. I think about the young lady who does my hair. I shared a part of me with her, and it connected us, and it made her look at me differently and vice versa. I think about my baby girl was in a hospital for the whole month. This entire month, she was basically at the hospital, and the chaplain came to sit with me, and we sat and we talked about how this testimony, our individual testimonies, how they're meant for us to share, because they're not supposed to be ours alone. We're not supposed to hold them in. We're supposed to tell. But again, it just depends on, I think, Emily and I think Tessie, you also touched on this too. It just depends on how vulnerable we're willing to be with sharing our stories. And that's something I actually tweeted about the other day, maybe about 3 or 4 days ago. I finally became vulnerable. And even, some of you all, I think a couple of you all probably read my blog, but I'm vulnerable, but I'm still very surface level. But I finally broke down to someone, and I was extremely vulnerable, and it made a difference with the way that we connected. So sharing your story, again, it just depends on how much you're willing to share. And so with that question, go ahead, Emily. I'm sorry. No.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, and that can be such a process in itself too, right? Like of like, it's not necessarily that like not vulnerable to vulnerable, like you were talking about, Kira, like there's a certain level of vulnerability, and then you get to a certain other level of vulnerability. And I think of that when it comes to telling the story that I'm planning to tell for the final project, because I've realized that I've kind of silenced and invisibilized myself for a while. And the first step that I'm taking in feeling comfortable with sharing my story with others is by telling it to Dr. Cook. And I know it's not going to be broadcast more widely, but it's still helpful to say, I'm telling this to one person. And because I told it to one person, maybe I can learn to share that vulnerability with other people too. And so the going into those deeper levels is something that storytelling helps us do.
Yes. I look at storytelling, Emily, as one of the things that I struggle with is sharing and feeling as if I'm making an excuse as to why I don't accomplish certain things. And that's something I know that this semester has taught me is I just can't be perfect. Like I've made so many errors, but it's because I'm human, and I look at all the things that I have been doing. And so my therapy this semester has been sharing my story with bits and pieces of people. And it's like, oh, wow. Okay, that makes sense as to why I didn't get that done. So that is what, that's something that's helped me. So after reviewing all of our lectures, the videos and everything that we've done in this class, how do you actually define storytelling?
Okay, so I guess I'll take a shot at it a little bit. Gans really stuck with me. The reading that was kind of early on. I think it was Michael Gans or Marshall Gans. I can't remember. I'm sorry to them. But I really connected with storytelling as a way to connect values, so that you have like a motivation to act. And so I really think about storytelling as one of like more of an end of a process of like self-reflection and growth, and where we share our narratives and we're vulnerable and we're giving like a piece of ourselves away, but that we've prepared the story so that we know how to translate values to create that motivation to act. So that's kind of how I kind of see that whole picture, if that makes sense.
I'm going to be honest. I saw this question and I got scared of this question immediately. And I think part of that, right, is there's storytelling like fiction, there's personal storytelling, there's historical story. So, all these different kinds. I felt like every time I tried to define it, there was a form of storytelling that it didn't quite fit, which I think is part of what storytelling is. It's adaptable, it's contextual. But I think in all of those things, it's, Megan, I like what you're talking about, kind of bringing it, it's like unifying, whether it's values or bringing meaning to something by kind of helping understand something complex and ambiguous, whether that's, factual or not, in terms of fictional versus non-fictional, or how we reflect back on our lives and kind of imbue that with understanding how things fit together. I realize that's still a super vague answer to give, but I guess that's kind of where I landed. But I think in the kinds of storytelling that we're talking about for this class, to reflect back on our answers to the last question, I think storytelling is fundamentally like a sharing of ourselves with other people, which I think is very powerful and amazing.
And you're right. It really is. Storytelling is subjective. You think about what we've heard. Some people start off with parables. Some people start off with analogies. Some people start off with, their true selves, but it's very subjective.
I appreciate so much everything you brilliant people have said, because I don't think I processed it that deeply beyond like this fundamental method of communication. But you're all like, when you're talking about it, it feels like you're talking about something that's like really intentional. Like we all learn about each other in different ways. And, we can learn a lot about a person just from things they say offhand or the way we observe them. But storytelling is something like that's pure in intention to communicate our stories in ways that we don't always do it, just getting by day to day in our other forms of communication. And y'all are so smart. You're so brilliant. It's all, I guess, for me, after listening to what you said, it's all about intention. And I love, Megan, you talking about it like being this culminating thing after all this processing. That's just so like, it's so beautiful and feels spiritual, and it's so reflective. And I'm just going to keep saying words and the word and. Okay, sorry. Yes, this is marvelous. Keep going, y'all. Sorry.
And so with what you just said, Tessie, it takes us to our next question, because there's so many different ways to create or to tell your story. There's so many ways that we can unfold our stories to make them brilliant, to make them, marvelous, to, all those beautiful words. So how did you decide to organize your story? And think about what we learned earlier in this semester. There were so many different formats that we can use. So I guess, how did you decide to organize your story? And anything else that you might want to add to that question?
So when I think about the different kinds of structures that we've been introduced to, I go straight to that Capecchi and Cage. What was it, like 7 different structures? And I didn't necessarily choose a particular shape, but I did kind of use that bookend approach, like start using the story to kind of frame everything else. But at the same time, it's so how do I describe it? Okay, so so I open with sort of a genderless telling of how I met and connected with my wife. And then after I do that, I invite the listener to think about how they imagined Erin, particularly in terms of gender. It's really helpful that she has a name that when you speak it aloud, it could be gendered either male or female. So it's very convenient for that particular exercise. But then I back up and tell about experiences of stereotypes and invisibilization, but also, allyship and understanding that I've experienced along the way, and then do the 3 points of what can you do before kind of closing with like, and now, Erin is my greatest advocate, and, kind of bringing it back to that relationship. So that's how I've structured it. I think one of the big questions that I had to figure out was whether or not I was going to use visuals or if I was going to do a straight to the camera. It feels really weird to tell this story with a PowerPoint, but at the same time, I think I am going to use visuals because I talk about media representation, and I think it's important to put pictures of faces on a screen for them to see that. And also, I think they can be useful in parts of the story. So it's going to be weird, but I'm going to do it.
I don't think it sounds like it's going to be weird. I think it's going to be marvelous. So congratulations and good luck. I'm also doing a PowerPoint. I don't want to see myself tell my story. So I'm really focusing on, I feel like I think it's a personal like vulnerability that I'm not willing to do. I think it's something I haven't overcome in terms of my ability and understanding of storytelling. I feel like I've been silenced and, told my story doesn't matter a lot. And so I feel like my presence takes away from my own story. So I'm really focused on like images and color and like a different setting that doesn't include me other than my voice in a background someplace. So I've struggled with organization. I've struggled a lot with the story in terms of how to build it and what kind of, outline to take, when to introduce different aspects. I've moved it all around and then I moved it all around again. And I feel like I'm rebuilding and rebuilding constantly on it, to be honest. So.
I will be kind of doing the same structure as you, Emily. I'm just going to talk to the camera. When I did the Cockies Reading Express, I ended up recording it like 12 or 13 times. And I kept watching it. And so I'm intentionally just talking to the camera because when I watched it, I thought I was just gonna be sick having to look at myself. I hate looking at myself. I have a lot of very strong feelings about everything that's happening here externally and the way I present myself to the world, like it's a whole thing. And so I, after like a million times watching myself tell the story and hearing this voice and it was a lot, and it made me deeply uncomfortable. And so now for this, I am going to lean as hard as I possibly can into this discomfort, and because I'm really good at intentionally hiding myself constantly. Like that's something I do all the time. It's really important to me to hide myself all the time. So I'm unhiding myself to tell the story, and I plan to just look directly into the camera lens and then watch myself afterwards and feel all my feelings, but send it anyway, and hopefully not have to do it 13 times or however many times. I'm a little nervous about not using visuals. Like I worry that I'm making a mistake, but also I really want to just sit there and say it to the camera and be bold for once in my life. Like, because that's not something I've ever been ever. And I think a lot of my story is about trying to gain some boldness. Does that make sense? I'm a little rambly. That's my intention, but I'm nervous about not using more visuals besides this. Maybe I'll have my cat with me. Like this is my cat. So okay, yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm really excited for y'all to be doing this. Megan, I think yours is going to be incredible. I really do. I really like, from everything you're saying, I think it's going to be truly incredible. Truly incredible. And Emily, yours too. And I know Kira's is going to be incredible. Okay, I'm going to stop. I love hyping y'all because I'm your biggest fan. I just want you to know, but I'm going to stop now. Thank you
First of
for
all,
humoring me.
you are amazing and you are gorgeous. So you should not hide behind the camera. You are fantastically just beautiful. I told you that earlier. You know, the whole everything that you have going on is beautiful. And every time we see each other, you're beautiful. So don't hide yourself. You are gorgeous. If you decide, just hold your cat. But no, seriously, you can do it. You can do it without your cat. And for me, I'm still processing exactly. I wrote it out. And I want to use visuals, but I've also thought about maybe instead of using a visual, maybe for me, it would be where I stand and I deliver the talk. So I've been thinking about different places where I can go to have my son record me to actually deliver the talk, and then maybe somehow embed, an image at certain places that's kind of important. So that's what I'm thinking. But all of your ideas, I'm super excited. Do you all, before we move to the next question, do you all want to just kind of recap what your topics are going to be?
Mine's going to be on sexual harassment and assault in the library, and my experiences with that and how administration can do better to support their employees and keep people safe.
I am talking about the invisibilization of bi+ people and ways that we can all work together against that.
I'm talking about educational pathways for non-traditional students.
And I'm going to talk about domestic abuse, focusing on emotional abuse. So the next question is, discuss how story workshopping could benefit the community or population that you work with. And if you don't work with the population that you think could benefit, think about your ideal job, your ideal position. How do you think storytelling or workshopping could assist?
I'll start if that's okay. I work with, younger adults because I work at a university. So I feel like I work with people who are really constantly belittled by society as not having the appropriate values, not taking things seriously. But I'm surrounded by these people and I see that these students are amazing adults who happen to be largely younger adults. We serve a diverse body, but a lot of younger students who have amazing stories to tell and deserve, if they want to tell those stories, to have an audience and to have the means to tell that. And I think it would be amazing to do some storytelling events at the library. I know that my library does an LGBTQ oral history project that the students do, and they'll interview people in the community and also other students, and they learn all about storytelling in that. We did a COVID one where we collected people's stories and their narratives about their experiences as college students going through COVID. And I thought the stories were spectacular, and hearing people, talk about processing this pandemic experience, having just moved away from home and trying to navigate adulthood and having to go through this is incredible. I think there's a lot of value in helping people to tell their stories and showing people that we want to hear their stories, especially young people, because they're so consistently devalued. So that's what I'm thinking.
Tessie, I love that, because last year when I taught at Tennessee State University, right when we entered COVID, because I love blogging, I decided my students would love blogging too. And I was teaching a freshman writing course. And so each one of them, I still have the blog, I have to share with you all, but my students blogged about their COVID experience. And so everyone told a story about COVID, and those who just didn't feel comfortable with writing, I had them do videos, but whatever they felt comfortable with, it's on our blog site. And it was so amazing because parents and faculty members and administration, like so many people took that. And we even had one of my students, her aunt works for a school in, I should know this, in China. So her students that she teach, they added to our blog. So it's a combination of, two different continents working together to share their COVID experiences. And the students over in China, they are learning English. So they were able to add, like I said, to our blog. So it was like a really amazing final presentation.
That's so cool.
So go ahead, Megan. Okay. So a few months ago, I started working at the public library main branch for my county. And so I'm still kind of learning in general, like getting to know the diversity of the patrons and kind of how they, I don't know, how they live in the world. Different parts of the county experience things in different ways. And I don't necessarily live in the same area that the main branch serves. So, but one thing that I have noticed that I think is really cool, and this might be dipping into the next question, and if so, just stop me. But one thing that I've noticed is that there are a lot of patrons who have been living in the area for a long time, who love to come in and talk about the library, how they experienced that physical library when they were children, and what's changed and what's still the same. And the people who have done that, like aside from age being fairly consistent when they're reflecting back on what's changed, there's still a fairly diverse group of people who have offered up those stories freely. One person who came in the other day and said, when I came in here for the first time I think she said, like as a 12-year-old, girls weren't allowed to wear shorts in the building. And somebody else saying, well, I remember we could go downstairs, which is now an all staff area. And so I think it's really cool when you think about stories of place and how places have changed. Especially, I do know enough about Decatur to know that Decatur has changed rapidly just in the last few decades. And largely gentrification. But to kind of collect stories around that and to have people tell stories of like, here is how we experienced Decatur. Here's how we've experienced the library in Decatur, and seeing all the perspectives on that, I think would be a really beautiful way of bringing people together within that community.
I just want to say I love that because my library has like really loyal employees that have been there for like a really long time, and like part of branches that opened like from their get-go. So they have like experiences where they go back like 16 years and they're like, I remember when it was like this. And so I think that's a great articulation of why it's important. So thank you for sharing that. So for me, I really think story workshopping is valuable as a way of healing. Particularly for me, I was taking advantage of my prom night. So I got pregnant. I was at Billboard, teenage girl who got pregnant prom. I kept my pregnancy hidden the entire time until the day she was born. Literally, I never went to a doctor. And then I was coerced into keeping her as a way to heal my abusive and broken family. And then once I kept her, my mom fled. And then I was left with my abusive father, who then began to abuse my baby. And then I attempted to take my life because I didn't see a way out. And I felt like she wouldn't be cared for if I was around. I felt like if I was gone, then she would be cared for. So I've lived a life of turmoil. And then after that, I was relocated through DV shelters for quite some time across the country. So my traumas have really informed my approach to life and communication and education. And after I got my bachelor's degree, I've only focused on nonprofit work, and I've worked in, for example, Big Brothers Big Sisters, and that was really a place where narratives and stories became a place of healing and sharing. Kids who had experiences and felt alone in the world were able to identify with other people's stories, and then began to see and recognize, yes, we're different, but there are similarities, hidden similarities at times. And then this continued in all of my work since then. So I really think that's the most important thing that I take away, especially like when I, later on coming through DV shelters and knowing what that experience is like to live in a shelter, and what the survival mode is like from other women who are in those shelters, understanding that using moments to share our stories to kind of break down this survival mode sometimes victims are in. Sometimes when you've been traumatized so much, you slightly become hardened and might approach things in inhumane ways at times. And so by sharing stories and feeling your pain and hearing other people's pains, you start to recognize how you need to approach things. You know what I mean? You start to kind of break down all of that hardened case around you, or maybe the harm you might do to others while you're thinking you're protecting yourself. That's kind of what I have thought about in terms of, I see that even in my technology classes. When I have 70-year-olds come and they say, well, I've got kids who I asked to teach me stuff, but I feel like I'm burdening them, or they get frustrated with me. Them telling me that is a way of them healing, and a way of opening up their ability to welcome learning and being vulnerable in this space to hear what I'm trying to teach them. And so like I said, healing.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing that much with us, Megan. Thank you for feeling comfortable enough to share that with us. And I'm sending you so much inspiration and so much love. And I'm just so proud of you for all that you have conquered and all that you will conquer. I had a moment the other day, and I was leaving a hospital, and I just said, I need to just go home and just take a bath. My dad's in one hospital, my daughter's in another hospital. And I had to kind of relocate where I was familiar. So I'm in a foreign, like in a place by myself. And I came home, and as I was driving, I was listening to a Kirk Franklin song. It's called Just For Me. And I love that song. If you ever get a chance, it's called Just For Me. And that song, it makes me cry, because in the song, it says, it's not fair. Like, God, why are you making me go through this? It's not fair. And I'm crying driving home, and it's about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't sleep anymore. And I was like, I have to go home and take a bath. I have to take a shower. I hadn't taken a shower in almost like a day and a half. And I'm like, okay, let me at least set it on. It's fine with the nurses and doctors. Let me go ahead and home and just take a shower. And I was like, I need to call somebody. And I couldn't think of anybody to call except for my girlfriend, and she's in Spain. As I called my friend in Spain, and she sat on the phone with me, and she knows my story, and She said, run you a really nice bubble bath. So I get home and I run bubble baths. She sends me a picture of this meme with a whole bunch of bubbles. And so I put a whole bunch of bubbles in there. I had some little snacks in the bathtub with me. And she stayed on the phone with me. And she said, you don't have to cry if you don't want to, but she was just there. And so she also shared with me, and this is where I was getting, she also shared with me the importance of our stories. She said, she didn't say story, but she said, your testimony is not meant for you. And it's hard for us to see that. The chaplain told me that the other day too. And it's hard for us to see that when we're in the thick of it. And even when we sit back and reflect, like, damn it, it's not fair. Like, why am I going through this? But when you look at the people that you touch, I can't tell you how many horrible situations I've been in. And then out of the blue, a student, a random stranger, or somebody comes and it's like, okay, all right, I see what you did, God. I see what you did. I have to share this story with this person because that was my whole reason for going through this. I just, as you were telling your story, I think about a situation that I'm still not comfortable with sharing right now, but something that happened to me. One, I was raped, I was molested, but then there are other things that happened. I remember sitting on the floor in my office as a college professor crying with a student who went through the same thing. And all I could think about was, wow. So I just applaud you for sharing that with us. And I'm so sorry if I made you cut your camera off, I'm sorry, but you are amazing. We all are amazing. And you know, you're right. It is healing. It's therapy.
I wish I could hug all of you right now.
I know.
Me too.
So I tell this really funny story. And my students always tell me I have a story for everything. So I guess this class is pretty good for me in a sense. When I was in law school, I remember this one particular day, I had a presentation because I had classes. I was a full-time college professor and I had classes during, it just depended on the semester. So this particular semester I had classes, it was like all day on a Thursday. I can't remember, but at any rate, a couple of weeks before, I love coffee. I was addicted to coffee in law school. Like I'm addicted. That's my vice. And 7-Eleven, I lived across the street from a 7-Eleven. I lived a double life and I got this apartment uptown in the city that I went to law school. So every morning I would go to 7-Eleven. I still have the app on my phone where I would get me a cup of coffee. And I remember this homeless man, he said, can I have your cup of coffee? I was like, sure. And I gave it to him. I had just mixed my coffee up. I was like, yay, I'm winning. It's free, you know? And out of the blue, this man said, can I have your coffee? I'm like, I hadn't even drunk out of it. I was like, sure. So a couple of weeks later, that day that I had class all day, I wore heels and I always walked because I was too frugal to move my car and I was too frugal to catch an Uber. So I'm like, that mile and a half, I'm walking, I'm gonna get my body in shape, you know, I'm gonna keep my little figure, you know, and so I walked to class with heels on and I have these ugly gold Vans. Hold on, I wanna show y'all the gold Vans. I'm actually doing, so I have these ugly gold Vans and my son talks about my Vans all the time. And these Vans, I have walked in Jerusalem with them. I walked in Spain. I walked in Lithuania. I've been to like 30 different countries in these ugly gold Vans. But these Vans, I used to put them in my backpack going to law school, right? And so I forgot my Vans. So I had class, I think at 9 or 10 o'clock that morning until like 9 or 10 o'clock that night. Here are my ugly Vans, y'all. They are like, my son was like, these are the ugliest things ever. But these shoes, they are my favorite and they're so comfortable. Look, they still look good.
I love them.
And so I'm like,
Me too.
Let's go. And so that morning, I forgot to put my Vans in my bag. So fast forward that night after class, about 8, 9 o'clock that night, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have heels on. There's no way I can walk that mile and a half, however long it was to get home. So I start taking my shoes off and I'm like, I guess I'm gonna have to walk barefoot because I'm telling y'all, I was like frugal. I'm not catching an Uber uptown. It's gonna cost like $20 to just go like 2 miles. And I don't know what else to do. So as soon as I literally was about to take my shoes off, this man came out of nowhere. He was like, yo, I know you. And I'm like, taking my book bag, because it's late at night in a city. And I'm like, okay, I know you. I know you. And he kept clapping. And I'm like, no, I don't know you. He's like, no, you really know me. And I'm like, okay, so I'm trying to, process of elimination. So where are you from? And I'm still clutching my book bag. And he was like, he kept clapping. I know where I know you. I know where I know you. And I'm like, okay, where do you know me? He said, you gave me that cup of coffee the other week. And I'm thinking to myself, like, coffee? Oh my God. Oh my gosh. And I didn't get a chance to take my shoes off. Before I knew it, we had already walked that mile and a half. He talked to me about why that cup of coffee was so important. He shared with me how he became homeless. He had just got out of jail that day before. He had a job interview that morning. That's why he needed that cup of coffee. And so many other things that I honestly can't remember. But I just remember, that. And I'm like, that is, I always share that story with students because just the act of kindness, everyone's not going to give their cup of coffee, but I did win that day too. I forgot to tell y'all this part. I left 7-Eleven, went to buy a cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts in the building where my law school was, but I got some free donuts. So even though I had to pay for my coffee, I got some free donuts. So I was pretty excited. But I always share that because the act of kindness, it's important. And so, that story, with all of the different emotions and, little things, the shoes and stuff, it just made me think about that. I thought it was a feel-good story. So, but that's the reason why we need to have, storytelling in our community, because we need to also see the importance of, if you're in a public library and you're talking about homelessness, you can actually share, if you have a similar story, you can share, how an act of kindness, again, may have helped out a homeless person. So anyone could have thought that he's just a beggar, but he really needed that cup of coffee to pick him up.
And I think I was revisiting the Mayat reading that we had. Because of the reflection paper and reading about the oral histories. And I think one of the little clips from that reading really stood out to me, which was this idea of, it was inserting people back into history, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the fact that, like you were just saying there, Kira, that it's not just about this abstract thing that we can say is blanket true for anybody. It's when we tell stories about the world, when we talk about what's happening, like people are implicated in that. People are affected by that. People, real life people with real lived experiences are in the mix. And we have to hear those stories in order to remember the humanity of the people who are living in this world and being affected by the way it is working or not. And so I think, kind of, I don't know if it exactly comes back full circle to the definition of stories, but I feel like stories are such an important tool for affirming humanity as a whole in all of its various dynamic ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you really highlighted something for me in talking about storytelling and keeping communities alive. Right, like keeping histories alive. And I think like with Native American populations like Blackfeet, for example, I think Blackfoot population, they're practicing sharing historical stories because their population and their language is dying and that history is dying. And so, storytelling is a way to keep communities and history alive too. So kind of plays off what you were saying a little bit.
Well, I wanted to kind of stick another question in before we get to the last question is real quick question. So we know how we would use it for our community, but how could you use storytelling for your personal lives? If it's too personal, we can skip it, but I just thought about that before I segue into that final question.
I already feel the impact of storytelling in my personal life because I guess I didn't realize how much of myself I don't share with people. Like I knew, but I'd never really processed how much of myself I don't share with people. And in beginning to do that, like through this class and with y'all, I realized just like this is self-gratifying. It feels really amazing sometimes to share yourself with people. Like it feels really amazing and affirming. Oh, hold on. I'm very sorry if you hear my cat. He is a senior citizen and he has dementia. And sometimes he just, I hear you. Please stop. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. He's crying. I don't remember where it was. Okay. It's self-serving. I feel really good being honest about who I am. I feel like I'm honest with other people about who I am. Suddenly I'm more honest with myself about who I am and more accepting of who I am. And that feels really, really good to me. That's been really impactful for me. And I also just even like with coworkers, I've opened myself up more with, you know, some of my close colleagues at work and had some really powerful conversations and said things I just figured I wouldn't share with anybody. And it's brought us closer together and they see me and then they want me to see them. And to want someone to see you is like a beautiful thing. And to be seen when you want to be seen is such a beautiful thing. I know that's very like me focused, but it's helped me a lot. And it's helped me get to know people a lot more too. And I'm very excited about seeing other people who want me to see them through their stories.
I think for me, it's I don't know if I guess I could say it's kind of dual pronged. I think on the one hand, particularly this final assignment, and I've already said this before, but like the story that I'm working on telling is one that I need to be able to tell, not just for myself, but for other people. And so that's a part of, I guess maybe in like the broad way I could describe it is just like acknowledging the power of story, both in terms of like why it's important for me to tell this particular story at this moment, but then also why I need to be mindful of how I tell stories and how I'm like receiving stories as well. So kind of recognizing like there may have been ways that I kind of uncritically told stories in the past where I was playing on emotions without meaning to, or I was co-opting other people's stories without meaning to, and looking back on that and saying that needs to be a practice that stops. I can't not think about that anymore. And this, by thinking through storytelling, intentionally, as we have in this course, I feel like I am able to honor the power that storytelling has both for good and for harm. And I can hopefully be a more responsible steward, for lack of better words, of my own corner of storytelling in the world.
So play a little bit off of what Tessie was highlighting about wanting to be seen and others wanting to be seen. I feel like by sharing my story and using, I kind of think about Audre Lorde, the uses of anger. And she said, focus with precision. It can be a powerful source of energy serving progress and change. And so I really feel like my story is definitely intersected in my workplace in a lot of ways. And during this pandemic, there was a real shift in the workplace in terms of like productivity and how we went about our job duties. And so I recognized, we were told to educate ourselves, do webinars and do trainings. And there wasn't a lot of communication among staff members. We weren't sharing anything, we weren't learning about anyone, but we were supposed to be educating ourselves. And I enrolled in this program and I got into all of Dr. Cook's courses about social justice and cultural, information and all this stuff. And thinking about all these stories, of change and progress and, overcoming, and my own stories of overcoming, and how that, is my source of energy and source of passion. And when I told them that I was going to school, because I'm not an official librarian and I get paid very meagerly, even though I have many, many degrees. So I figured I'd go get this master's degree and get paid a library salary. And I was told I couldn't do education on work time. I could do all the webinars and educational programming and educational reading. I could read the newspaper. I could shop at Walmart. I could shop at Target, but I couldn't do any of the University of South Carolina classes on work time. And what I recognized was I couldn't better myself on work time, because then I would be credentialed and I would be requiring a higher salary apparently. And so they'd rather keep me stuck than let me, explore education. And so I've used that as my energy to try to communicate with other people my story and my understanding of seeing other people where they are. And I recognize that by sharing my story, other people have said to me that they're tired. I had the janitor at the library stop me in the parking lot the other day and said she's tired of being a janitor and she's older. And I've helped her get other jobs with the county because she was only working like 10 hours as our janitor at our library. And she's looking at her life the same way I looked at mine with cancer. We're coming to an end place in our timeline and we won't be able to carry on forever. And she just wants to have a seat at the table, so to speak, to be seen. And I've used my story, that power, that anger that I've had from my experiences, to see her, to recognize her pain and to recognize her story. And she sees that I recognize her, and now she's willing to ask for help and say, what can I do? And so I've literally offered to probably like 6 branches in my county to put people into school so that they can share their stories and they can better themselves, and we can all start to communicate and work together. Because right now it seems like our directors don't want us to communicate and they don't want us to share our stories and our experiences. And it's a way to keep us limited mobility and under control and without voice. And so, like I said, there's a bit of anger, if you can tell, for me with my workplace right now. So
Thank y'all for sharing. Because of the sake of time, we only have, I think, about 5 or 6 minutes left. I wanted to just end with you sharing a resource that you believe that Dr. Cook, out of all resources that we have watched, read in this course, what is a resource that she just has to keep for this class, or that you really appreciate her providing us with this class? And that's hard for me. I just thought about that, like, oh gosh, what's one resource? I need to go back to the syllabus.
This may be my suggestion because we read it the most. I found the Cage and Capecci Living Proof text to be just very practically helpful. It's hard for me to say keep this and like above all else. I don't know that I would say that, but I will say that for me, that is something that stood out as a very useful text that I could see myself going back to in the future. it also made me think of, I don't know if I share this with y'all, but before I started working at the library, I worked at a seminary. I was in academic support, and did a lot of writing work with students. And I was like, this was a text that, like, the Cajun Campeche text was something that they should have had at the seminary too, because of thinking about like how to share a story with people, and all the different, like, all the exercises and reflective tasks and recommendations I thought were really useful. So you all have read it, so I don't need to explain it to you, but I think it's useful, and a good one to keep along with many others.
And I know it was a question that I didn't originally ask, but just for the sake of time, I was wondering if there's anything that stood out. I know for me, there were several of the TED Talks that like really stood out to me. I'm trying to remember. I could see her. It was I don't know how to pronounce her name. It was in week 12. I think it was Satori. That particular TED Talk, it was the power of telling stories of protests and pandemic. You remember that one? And there was one earlier. I talked about that the last lecture too, the last one too. But those are just the TED Talks. I love the visuals and the way that everyone had their own way of presenting. That's something that I think was just really beneficial for me.
I commented earlier in response to Emily, but everything about the ethical storytelling unit was so valuable to me, that like it clicked a light bulb in my head, like, oh wow, I have not been really thinking about the ethics of storytelling, and it's so important. It blows my mind that I have been careless before with sharing stories. Like, I mean, I understand, like people's want for privacy and think I have always been respectful of that, but just because it's not said, I don't know. It changed the way I operate, and every day now I think about that, and I like every day I hear somebody's story, and I think that's their story. Like, it just, like, I want to communicate like something that was very powerful to me about it, and I have to stop and think, how are you gonna communicate this? That's not your story. That's not you. You don't have any claim over it. That changed me. So everything in that unit.
I think I highlighted previously in our literature circles, I really enjoyed the dangers of a single story. And I can't remember who wrote it. And it's obviously in the title, the concept. And I think it speaks to bringing people to the table who might not maybe have a willingness to talk about social justice concepts and issues, and self-reflecting. And so I think that was something I take away in terms of communication patterns and storytelling, in terms of ensuring that the story tone, what have you, is offered in a way, especially when it's different, or maybe not information that's readily wanted or acceptable by some people. So making sure that the process of the storytelling is communicated in such a way that invites them to engage in critically thinking about what you're offering them. And then, that leading to, cultural humility and cultural competence, and, and just opening up conversation. So I think that that was a good one for me.
Well, this is our last circle together, and I'm just really thankful and honored that I was able to work with you, beautiful people. And if there's nothing else, I can go ahead and end this session. And just again, thank you for everything, for sharing, for being vulnerable, and just being amazing human beings.
I love you all. I really love you all. And I will be in a circle with you anytime, inside or outside of a classroom. I think you're all phenomenal, and I hear the way you speak, and I can see in my mind the changes that are going to come in the world because of the way that you operate and because of your hearts. And I love you. And I love you.
All the amens, all of them.
All of them. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your patience and your support and the freedom to share and explore together. And thanks for being warriors.